As the leader of an organization, you need people who are motivated and enthused. You need them to have a feeling of connection and ownership. You want employees who are inspired and regularly tell other people because they are so excited about what's happening at work. You want them to be good at holistic improvements, the things that improve not only safety and quality, but performance and cost as well. And ideally, those folks are exceeding your expectations so that on a regular basis, you are amazed as a leader that your people are able to do all of the things that they do. You want customers to be able to admire your organization, and you want your organization to be a magnetic draw for the right kinds of talent. Most of all, you want to be able to establish that kind of an organization and have it sustained for decades through multiple generations of leaders. You need to be able to have constancy of purpose, the most valuable of all of the Shingo principles, and that's what we're talking about today. My name's Ted Iverson. I've spent the last 30 years as a Shingo examiner. I led 4 transformations in different industries before ever becoming a consultant, and I spent the last 10 years of my life working with McKinsey & Company, leading some of the largest transformations that they've done globally. And today we're going to talk about establishing constancy of purpose so that you can have the kinds of things in your organization that you need to be successful. When we talk about purpose, purpose has to be meaningful. It is the good that you do in your organization. It's the compelling reason that your business exists and may have much to do with what the founders originally started with. It creates a common objective with easy consensus when you have meaningful purpose, and it allows us to focus our efforts toward the future. Meaningful purpose answers the why. When you ask people to make improvements and to do things they've never done before, it answers the why about why should I be involved? Why should I care? Why is this important to the company? And why is it important to our future? Purpose is not a way to increase shareholder value. That's a byproduct of having an effective purpose and running your business well. Purpose is not something we frequently change. It's not a bright, shiny object where we move from item to item and have distractions that constantly change the organization's focus. Purpose is not for promoting the image of the organization externally. Yes, you do need some of those ESG type attributes, but we've gotten in a lot of trouble in organizations focused on ESG because the image they portray externally is not necessarily in line with what they practice internally. And so what we're talking about here is very much the internal practice of establishing purpose and running in that direction very, very effectively. Purpose is not something that's on the wall that's easily transferred from one organization to the next. It is something that is unique to your organization. It's a bit like when we go out in nature and we see valuable metals in pieces of rock. Purpose is something that is within your organization, so you don't have to create it. It's there. But sometimes you have to look a little bit harder to be able to find it. And sometimes you need to refine it in order to be able to gather it into a place and represent some value. That gathering happens sometimes in leadership workshops. It happens in interviews with customers and partners and suppliers. It happens when you do panel interviews with your employees and you ask them questions like, what makes you really proud to work here? And when you feel really good about working here, what kind of story or example comes behind that? As I mentioned before, sometimes it's in the legacy of the founder, and sometimes it's through that constant observation of what really makes a difference to the people in the organization and when do they feel the most energized. Once we establish what that purpose is, it becomes colored and illustrated by the stories that we tell. So you establish that meaningful purpose and you have that as a foundation principle. Then you begin to align your business strategies so that they support meaningful purpose to happen more frequently, more consistently, more systemically, and more dependably. You cascade those at each layer through the business so that at each layer they can describe how they contribute to purpose, and they have the KPIs, the key performance indicators, and the KBIs that reflect that. And of course, your business improvement systems need to connect to that purpose. So it looks a little bit like this in the diagram. Purpose is at the top. It focuses everything we do as an organization and our key talking points for leadership. It cascades into strategy and goals, and then is connected to that business improvement system. So whatever your business improvement system is, that cycle begins to represent a continuous improvement cycle at the business level, a PDCA reflection of plan, do, check, and act at your business level that you can continue to accelerate and continue to refine as you improve the business. A couple of examples to help create that story and that image. Almost a decade ago, I guess almost a decade and a half ago, I was part of a team of Shingo examiners at a medical device equipment company in Europe. And as we divided up responsibilities, it was my opportunity to go down into the production areas and especially to begin at shipping and receiving and to be able to talk with the folks there and understand the level of strength that was available in their operations and in how they approached their improvement processes. And as I came into that area, I met with the business leader. And as we met together and we talked, I asked him, please tell me, what are the things you do here and how do you go about your daily work? His first response is, well, what we do is we relieve pain and suffering. And I said, okay, tell me how you do that in shipping and receiving. And with a big smile on his face, he said, well, you know our products, right? And I said, I do. I understand that you produce stents that go into people's arteries to help make their blood flow better, and that oftentimes those patients are in critical conditions before they receive your product. And he said, that's right. He said, our products are very important, but he says, none of that happens if my operations aren't running perfectly, if our inventory counts are off, if our packaging isn't excellent, if our quantities are not appropriate, if we don't deliver in the right amount of time. He said, none of those things happen if we aren't on our game. And it was obvious that he had taken all of the business attributes in his area, connected them to purpose. And as he's doing this description, his team members are gathering around and they're presenting it in such level of passion that it's obvious that these are not professionals that work in shipping and receiving. These are people who are relieving pain and suffering by working in shipping and receiving. The energy was palpable, the engagement was high, and I didn't think it could get any more powerful. But I said, how do you know? Because you never see the patients. You don't see what's happening. And he started to talk about systems that were in place to help them understand the good that they do. Those systems included regular visits on a monthly basis with all hands meetings where people told the story of their lives about, here's what my life was like before, here's what it's like now. And those people who came were often relatives of folks who worked in the factory. At other times, they were distant and they were far. So these people got to see the impact that they had on others when they did their jobs well. It was a tremendous example. Their overall purpose was to relieve pain and suffering, and they did it extremely well, and it was powerful engagement. Let me share with you another example from a completely different industry, from the food processing industry. This was one of the largest potato processing plants in the nation. They produced about 1.8 million pounds every single day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 300 plus days a year. When I started visiting with them initially, there were very adversarial union relations. There was a constant line of people with chairs in place to be able to wait and file grievances in human resources. There were poor management behaviors that had led to a lot of these impacts and these poor behaviors. Customers were dissatisfied with delivery and quantity issues. Quality was poor, and probably more than anything else, safety was not where it needed to be. These folks produced French fries and tater tots and hash browns, and they were grade A, so needed to be at the top of their game. It was not uncommon to see battles between different departments. Some of the folks in packaging operations and some of the folks in maintenance regularly battled, with packaging operators saying something to the effect of, if maintenance would fix our equipment, I could hit my schedules and we could do it the right way. while the maintenance guys were saying, you know what, if you would run the equipment the way that it's intended to be run, we wouldn't have the kinds of issues with maintenance that we regularly have. And those were the battles that we faced on a regular basis. Determining a meaningful purpose was much more difficult in this situation until we realized that French fries and tater tots and hash browns are one of America's #1 comfort foods. And when families are strapped for time, and when they need something easy to fix that is somewhat nutritious for their family, they turn to these type of products. And so the overall purpose of that effort became that we provide comfort. Now, you can't provide comfort if you don't have top quality. You can't provide comfort if it costs too much. You can't provide comfort if the packaging doesn't work effectively. And you can't provide comfort if it's not available on the shelf. So all of those business attributes rolled in. And I think my favorite part of that entire journey there was about 12 to 14 months later when I was observing a maintenance man finishing all of his preventive maintenance activities on a packaging machine. And he was turning over that equipment to the operator who was there. And these two folks I had seen battle so many times, but this time they'd gotten to the point where he finished his work and he turned to the operator and he said, here's all of the tasks I have completed. Here's the status of your equipment. And then he said, are you comfortable with the changes I've made? She turned back, she smiled at him, and she said, I'm very comfortable. Thank you so much. And that was the moment I realized that we had achieved a lot of things that we needed to at that very granular level. Of course, their safety improved tremendously. The grievances became a thing of the past. We actually increased our production by nearly 40% with no additional capital equipment, no additional hours or expense in labor. So some tremendous outcomes. When we look at the Shingo model, you'll see that the Shingo model, the very top diamond, has to do with principles. And the principle that we're talking about is in the very top of that diamond. It is the one that talks about creating constancy of purpose. So when we do this in these organizations, it clarifies our intention as leaders. It creates that baseline for decision making. It creates motivation for people to be engaged and connects the hearts and minds of the people to the goals and objectives of the organization through purpose. People get inspired and their productivity improves, their connection to meaning improves, and customers begin to identify with the kinds of businesses they want to have in their circle of supply chain. It increases that brand identity and, of course, the collaboration that comes with it. Let me share with you another example to help color what this really looks like. Again, from industries that are not typically associated with purpose. This one comes from a mining company in Chile, a mining company in an area where they're doing electrowinning, a chemical process that gathers metal out of solution. This is a very difficult area to work. It requires fresh air respirators. It has high voltage. It's a very hot environment. It requires a lot of heavy lifting equipment, and it is noisy. When we began working there, it was not a pleasant place to work, and when they had openings in that area, it was difficult to find people who wanted to be there. As they looked at what their opportunities were, and especially related to purpose, they reflected on the corporate purpose, which was to build a better world. And they said, how does that apply to us? And their purpose became protagonists to build a better world. In other words, the way that we act ourselves allows us to build a better world. Again, tremendous outcomes there, tremendous results, an improvement in their productivity and their safety that were very much in the aspirational levels. In fact, to the point where one of their key maintenance managers came to me and he said, you know, before we started all of this, I never believed in a lot of this culture. He said, I believed that if we were going to establish higher run rates and do more, that we needed better technology. And he said, for 30 years, I have believed that. And then, with some emotion in his voice, he said, I don't know how we're achieving the goals that we are now because they're beyond the technical limit. But he said, we hit our aspirational goals this last quarter, and we set goals that were even higher. And he says, I'm confident that we'll hit those as well. And he said, why didn't I learn this 30 years ago? Because it was so much that I could have done. And then we talked about it's not the absence of technology, it's when we get the culture moving in the right direction, when we get purpose in front of people and they become engaged. And then we utilize technology to move them even further than what they thought they could do, even beyond the technical limits of what they had experienced in the past. With that, I'll conclude by saying that once you get meaningful purpose in place, you've got to establish the right systems and tools to be able to continue to support that purpose and to keep it foremost and in front of everything else that we do. So you've got to, as leadership, constantly be talking to people and illustrating with stories what purpose is about. You've got to have a communication system that allows that type of strategic communications to be in place, so that when you see one of those instances that is a fleck of gold or a piece of valuable metal, that perfect example, you need a landing zone to drop that in where the communication system can then spread that out to everybody across the organization so that it's almost as if they were there. You need to be able to include in your leader standard work certain activities where leaders consciously go out and look for purposeful opportunities in communications and become very proficient at that. And then lastly, you need to have those purpose moments in your communications on a regular basis and continue to refresh that through a variety of different medias. With that, I'll leave you that this is one of the most important principles of all of the Shingo principles and will bring great meaning to your effort if you can establish meaningful purpose.